There is a moment, almost always silent, almost always imperceptible, when life shifts direction. It doesn't come with trumpets, it has no cinematic epiphany, it isn't a dramatic snap. It's more subtle, a small inner shift. As if something inside you took a step to the side and suddenly the entire emotional landscape moved into a new position. Hawkins used to call this point a field shift, the instant when a minimal perception opens the way for a greater transformation. And if you've ever felt that something rearranged itself inside you for no apparent reason, then maybe you've already lived through this invisible moment. Today, we're going to explore this mysterious point, the micro-perception that precedes every major emotional turning. There is a feeling many people carry for decades without being able to name it, a feeling that life is happening, but something inside remains stuck, as if existence were always a little out of focus. It's not exactly pain. It's not exactly sadness. It's more like an emotional background noise that never switches off. Many people, especially adults who have already gone through losses, family reconfigurations, silent crises, or long periods of emotional survival, enter an automatic mode. They do, they handle, they function, but they no longer feel the same clarity of their own awareness. It's a kind of tiredness that doesn't come from the body, but from the accumulation of decades of small inner concessions, unspoken feelings, ignored intuitions, fears that never found a voice, and that extreme care for others that ends up becoming neglect of oneself. Over time, this lack of clarity turns into a sort of low internal perception, a disconnection so continuous that it becomes invisible. And it is precisely in this scenario that the micro-perception moments become decisive. Because what changes a life is not a great revelation, but the subtle awakening of something that had been asleep. It's when a sentence you overhear without meaning to, or an unexpected silence, or even a strange discomfort in your chest, creates a small crack in your usual defenses. This is the crack Hawkins considered the turning point. It is not the moment you change, it is the moment you internally admit that something needs to change. And this admission, however small, shifts the entire emotional field. First like a soft echo, then like a clarity that begins to form slowly. The problem is that almost no one talks about these moments because they are not glamorous. They are discreet, intimate, almost too private to become a story, but it is precisely they that define the course of emotional maturity. If there is a point at which everything begins to change, it is never grand. But when recognized, it becomes an inner promise. I can live with more clarity than this. This promise is not a vow, it is more like a whisper, a permission that is born within you. Hawkins said that consciousness changes when the inner field changes, and the field changes when you notice something that previously went unnoticed, not when you force it, not when you decide rationally, but when you feel a slight shift in your internal frequency. These micro-perceptions can appear in simple ways: a slight discomfort you don't feel like ignoring, a gentle intuition that pulls you toward a new path, even if you can't explain why. A sense that this thought no longer fits who I've become. A strange calm in the midst of chaos, as if something were saying, this no longer defines me. It's like when a misaligned door finally settles and fits into place with ease. The world outside remains the same, but you are no longer exactly the same person who woke up that morning. The promise. The great promise here is simple and profound. These micro-perceptions are the beginning of a clearer, more honest, and lighter emotional life. Not because they solve your problems, but because they return something that over time you may have lost, your internal point of reference. They work like small lanterns pointed inward, revealing corners of the mind and heart that had been dark for years. You don't change because you want to, you change because you finally see. And when this kind of clarity arrives, even in drops, something starts to reorganize inside. It's as if you realize you don't need to carry everything alone, or that certain pains have outlived their time, or that certain narratives you repeated for decades no longer make sense. This is the beginning of the path, a path that doesn't require strength, only presence. The moments that truly transform our lives rarely have shape, image, or immediate logic. They arrive as delicate inner waves, almost shy, yet full of meaning. That's why so many people ignore them, because we are used to associating change with intensity. When, in truth, real emotional change usually enters through the back door of consciousness. Hawkins insisted that the energetic field of consciousness reorganizes before the mind notices, and it is precisely this that creates that strange feeling of something is moving inside me. It's a microscopic shift, but one that over time becomes impossible to ignore. Microperception as a sign of maturity. When you feel this subtle change, you are not becoming confused. You are becoming more mature. The adult mind, after decades of accumulation, tends to become rigid. So when a micro-adjustment appears, even a small one, it works as a sign that something inside you is still alive, flexible, breathing. It's almost as if your perception were saying, I am still here. I can still move. I can still hear myself. These signs are valuable because they show that your sensitivity hasn't died. It was simply buried under obligations, old pains, and emotional survivals. The feeling of internal rearrangement. Maybe you've experienced this. A day when some memory loses the weight it once had, or a sadness that always returned begins to dissolve, or a constant anxiety gives you an unexpected break. Nothing external changed, but inside, something rearranged itself. It's like moving the furniture in a dark room and only then turning on the light. You didn't see the process happening, but you immediately notice that the inner space has become more breathable. This rearrangement can come with curious sensations, a quiet peace, almost without a reason, an insight too quick to translate, a lightness that feels unfamiliar, or a confidence that appears without effort. These sensations are like signs that your consciousness is stepping up a level, not in a mystical spiritual sense, but in the human and deeply real sense of the word clarity. The pause that reveals the field. Many people think internal transformation happens in the moment of emotional explosion, but in truth, it happens in the interval, in the pause. The pause is the place where consciousness reveals itself. You know that moment when you choose not to react the way you always do, not raise your voice, not swallow everything in silence, not run away, not please automatically. That split second in which you breathe differently. That is where life changes. The pause is the door through which micro-perception enters, and within that pause, a freedom is born that doesn't depend on external events. When micro-perception becomes an invitation. If you've ever felt that sensation of something in me is tired of the old, that is an invitation, sometimes subtle, sometimes persistent, but always honest. This invitation doesn't pressure you. It doesn't demand that you break with everything. It doesn't ask for drastic changes. It simply says, observe. Because observing is already the beginning of transformation. Over time, these small observations become choices, and choices become new inner paths. And these paths slowly reorganize your emotions, your patterns, your memories, and your historical weight. Life changes when your point of observation changes, and that point shifts when you recognize the invisible instant in which something inside you yields, loosens, opens, or simply matures. If there is something deeply human and at the same time deeply spiritual, it is this ability to perceive the almost imperceptible. Most people spend their lives chasing big signs, big answers, big turning points. But real life, adult life, emotionally mature life does not work like that. It changes in the details, in the silent internal rearrangements, in the perceptions that arrive quietly and before you even notice have already changed the shape of your inner world, reinforcing the heart of the video. You don't need to wait for major events to transform your life. It is already changing, now in this exact moment, through small shifts in the way you feel and perceive. Hawkins said that consciousness reveals itself when we stop fighting what is trying to emerge. And maybe that's what you've been feeling lately. Not a crisis, but a realignment. Not a collapse, but a reorganization. Not an ending, but a quiet beginning. These moments are seeds, and seeds don't make noise to grow. The natural cycle of micro-perceptions. With each new micro-perception, something inside you relieves, releases, gains space, and gradually rebuilds your relationship with life. It is a slow movement, but a consistent one. And when you look back, you realize that the old weight no longer represents you. That chronic anguish has lost its intensity. That old narrative no longer dominates you. That part of you that lived on autopilot has begun to wake up. There is no urgency in this, only direction, the clarity that emerges at the end. One of the marks of this process is the feeling of inner recognition, of looking at yourself and thinking, now I understand what was happening, or now I see why it felt so heavy, or even, now it makes sense. I was changing on the inside and I didn't know. Clarity never comes from the outside. It always begins in this invisible instant, this subtle point Hawkins described, the moment when consciousness shifts fields and you shift with it. And the most beautiful part is that this process, even though deep, is natural. You don't need to force it. You only need to notice. If this video touched you at any point, even a small one, it's likely that you are living one of these invisible instants right now. Perhaps an internal reorganization you haven't put into words yet. Perhaps an emotional cycle that is closing. Perhaps a new clarity beginning to be born. So I offer you an invitation. Keep following this channel and leave a comment if you've ever felt this internal shift. This micro-perception that changes everything without saying a word. Sometimes, by putting it into words, you realize you're not going through it alone. And that realization, by itself, is already an act of healing. Comment below if you've ever felt this silent rearrangement within you. Your experience may illuminate the process of someone who is going through the same transition.